The surrender was scheduled for the 14th hour. Reeves arrived at the 13th. Velsari noted this first as an electromagnetic anomaly, a single human biosignature moving through the docking corridor with the unhurried field pressure of something that did not know it was supposed to be afraid. Every living thing broadcast fear into the electromagnetic spectrum when afraid. It was involuntary. Biological. Universal across every species. Velsari had catalogued in 31 cycles of diplomatic observation. The human's field was flat. Not suppressed. Velsari knew suppression, had documented it in 17 species, the tight-coiled static of something holding itself together by force of will. This was different. The field was simply undisturbed. Like deep water with nothing moving beneath it. Velsari stood at the observation platform's primary viewport, their light script cycling through the standard pre-documentation pattern, pale gold for professional neutrality, faint blue for recording mode, and watched the human come through the door. She was shorter than Velsari had expected. The Threnodidae were tall, six-limbed, and bilateral symmetry broke at their torso into a secondary shoulder structure that made most species instinctively recalibrate their sense of scale when standing near one. The human looked at Velsari, looked up slightly to account for the height differential, and said, "Is there a bathroom on this level?" Velsari's light script flickered. The question was in standard Galactic, accented with the particular flat vowel compression that Velsari had learned to associate with the mid-continental regions of the human northern hemisphere. The tone was entirely conversational. Behind her, through the viewport, the Keth Dominion fleet occupied a significant portion of the visible sky. 1,400 vessels of varying class, from cityweight dreadnoughts to the sleek, fast interdictors the Keth used for what they called absorption facilitation, which the rest of the galaxy called something else and, mostly did not say out loud. The fleet's electromagnetic signature was immense. Velsari could feel it even through the platform's shielding, a deep, base register pressure at the edge of their sensory range, like the vibration before a structure fails. The human had walked through that signature to get here. Her field remained flat. "Down the secondary corridor," Velsari said. "Third door." "Thanks." She left. Velsari stood at the viewport and attempted to resume their pre-documentation pattern and found, after a moment, that they had no idea what pale gold felt like anymore. Her name, the manifest said, was Lieutenant Commander Amara Reeves, Earth Defense Liaison, attached to the Terran Continuance Council as primary diplomatic interface for the cessation proceedings. The manifest also noted previous postings, salvage operations in the Kepler debris field, 3 tours on deep-range scout vessels, 1 recorded incident involving an improvised hull repair that the manifest described as unorthodox and that Velsari suspected involved the human doing something that should not have worked and, then, being very calm about it afterward. The shuttle she had arrived in confirmed the hypothesis. Velsari had observed it through the docking bay feed while waiting. It was scarred along the port side in a pattern consistent with grazing weapons fire old damage, the scoring oxidized to a flat gray, and the starboard thruster housing had been replaced at some point with a component from a different manufacturer, mated to the original frame with what appeared to be a combination of standard coupling hardware and something Velsari's database could not immediately classify. The shuttle was functional. It was also an object that had clearly been in several situations that should have ended it, and had not. Velsari was still thinking about the shuttle when Reeves came back from the bathroom. She crossed to the viewport and stood next to Velsari, which was either a statement of comfort with alien proximity or simply the most direct path to the thing she wanted to look at. She looked at it. The Keth fleet. 1,400 vessels, their drive signatures painting the dark in long amber streaks. She looked at it for a while. "Huh," she said. "They brought a lot." Her electromagnetic field remained flat. Velsari's light script tried to write something and stopped. There was a Threnodidae concept to Velthara for the particular grief of witnessing a beautiful thing that does not know it is about to end. A reef before a pressure wave. A forest in the dry season. Velsari reached for Velthara and found it did not fit precisely. The concept required the beautiful thing to be passive. Unaware. Waiting. Reeves did not appear to be waiting. She reached into the chest pocket of her uniform, standard Terran defense weave, dark, functional, worn at the left cuff in a way that suggested she'd had it for a while, and produced a notepad. Paper. Actual pressed fiber paper, which Velsari had not seen a working diplomat use in 15 cycles. She found a pen in the same pocket. It was a simple thing, metal-barreled, the clip slightly bent, a small dent near the tip from some ancient impact. She clicked it once. Started writing. Velsari watched the pen. They were not sure when they started watching the pen, but they could not stop. It moved across the paper with unhurried confidence, not the careful precision of someone drafting a formal statement, but the loose, deliberate motion of someone writing something they have already thought through. Whatever was going on in the rest of the solar system, the Keth fleet running its final positioning calculations, the Galactic Council observer channels filling with the quiet procedural murmur of civilizations preparing to document a capitulation, Reeves was writing, and the pen moved like the rest of it was someone else's problem. On the other side of the viewport, a Keth Dominion interdictor completed a slow arc across Velsari's field of view. It was approximately 4 times the length of the observation platform. Its hull was smooth, dark, unmarked. The Keth did not display victories. They considered display unnecessary. The absorbed were absorbed. The record existed. There was nothing to prove. 43 civilizations. Velsari had the records. 43 species that had looked at a Keth fleet and calculated the cost of resistance and arrived at the correct answer: surrender costs less than fighting. Every one of them was correct. Every one of them was gone anyway, eventually, absorbed into the Keth in the slow, methodical way the Keth did everything. The Keth were not cruel. They were simply certain, which was its own kind of terrible. The pen stopped. Reeves read back over what she'd written. Flipped to the next page. Read that too. Made one small addition. Velsari watched the pen make it, a short mark, decisive, and then she clicked the pen closed and put it back in her pocket with the notepad. She looked at the fleet again. Velsari's light script was not doing anything. It had been blank for, they checked their internal chrono, 6 minutes and 40 seconds. This had never happened. Not in 31 cycles. Their dermis was simply dark. They could feel the absence of it, the way a room feels when a sound you stopped noticing suddenly stops. Okay, Reeves said. She turned from the viewport. Her field was still flat. The pen was in her pocket. She looked at Velsari with the particular expression Velsari had learned to associate with humans who were about to ask for something that they already know the answer will be yes to, because the ask is framed as a reasonable operational request and the full implications are not visible until later. Let's make them regret the trip. The counterattack began with what Velsari could only describe, in Threnody, as organized chaos, though organized was generous and chaos did not fully capture the intentionality. Earth's defense forces numbered 312 vessels. Against 1,400. The Keth fleet was not only larger, it was newer, better armed, crewed by a species that had been conducting military absorption operations for 4 centuries and had refined the process to something approaching industrial efficiency. The correct tactical response, by every military doctrine in the Galactic Council database, was a defensive formation: minimize exposure, protect the homeworld's upper atmosphere, negotiate terms of surrender that preserved maximum civilian continuity. Earth's defense forces scattered. Velsari watched the tactical display and attempted to find the logic. Ships broke from formation in every direction, into the asteroid belt, into the shadow of the gas giant, behind the debris field of what had been a Terran station in the outer system before the first Keth engagement 6 hours ago. They vanished from clean scan range and did not regroup. There was no second formation. No fallback line. They simply ceased to be a fleet in any sense that the Keth tactical system or Velsari's own training had a category for. HFY Haral stood at the adjacent viewport, the Keth Dominion's observation delegate, their smooth gray integument carrying the faint luminescence that Velsari had come to recognize as the Keth equivalent of satisfaction. They were tall, slow-moving, and spoke standard Galactic with the particular precision of someone who had learned it as an academic exercise rather than a necessity. Dispersion under pressure, HFY Haral said. The standard mammalian panic response. They will attempt to regroup at the third moon. They did not attempt to regroup at the third moon. Velsari watched a cluster of 6 human ships emerge from the debris field and strike the flank of a Keth supply line fast, already gone by the time the Keth interdictors rotated. 3 minutes later, 2 more ships hit a different position. Then, another position. Then, 5 ships simultaneously hit 3 positions, which required coordination that had no right to exist in a force that, as far as the Keth tactical display could determine, was no longer communicating on any standard frequency. "They have lost unit coherence," HFY Harral said, with the confidence of someone reporting a fact. "This is disorganized retreat disguised as aggression." Velsari said nothing. Velsari was watching the display. The human ships were not retreating. They were also not attacking in any pattern Velsari's diplomatic observer training covered, which admittedly was not comprehensive, but Velsari had observed 7 military conflicts in a professional capacity and this did not look like any of them. It looked like something that had no intention of winning any individual engagement. Something that was not trying to win engagements. Something that was doing something else entirely, and the individual engagements were a byproduct. From across the room, Reeves was speaking into the communications array in a low, unhurried voice. Velsari had agreed to let her use the array. The agreement had taken approximately 40 seconds and had felt, at the time, like a minor operational accommodation of the sort that diplomatic observers made routinely to maintain functional relationships with the parties they observed. Velsari was beginning to understand that they had agreed to something else, though the full shape of it was still unclear. "North quadrant, 2 clicks off the debris line. Vasquez, you have a firing window in approximately 90 seconds. Her field was still flat." Velsari turned back to the display. HFY Harral was narrating again. "The humans would consolidate here, the Keth response to that consolidation would achieve this result, and, each time they predicted, the display showed something else. Not the opposite of the prediction. Not a mirror. Something that the prediction had not included as an option, as if the humans were working from a decision tree that had branches the Keth tactical calculus had not modeled because no species had ever used them before. They are expending considerable resources for minimal territorial gain," HFY Harral observed. Velsari considered pointing out that territorial gain did not appear to be the objective and, then, did not point it out, because they were not sure what the objective was, and, saying "I don't know what they're doing" felt like a statement that had implications they were not ready to catalog. On the display, a ship designation Terran defense vessel Ardent, Velsari's system noted, a mid-class patrol vessel with engine damage consistent with the first engagement 2 hours ago, was moving. Not toward a firing position. Velsari tracked it, trying to find the tactical purpose, and, then, the purpose became visible and, Velsari's light script stopped. The Keth command vessel's communications array was its coordination hub. If that array went dark, the fleet's response time would drop, not permanently, but for long enough that a coordinated strike from multiple concealed positions would have a window they wouldn't otherwise have. The Ardent was moving at an angle that would bring it directly across the array's main dish structure. At its current speed and heading, it was not going to survive that. The pilot knew. They had to know. The angle was not an accident. Nothing about the last 4 hours had been an accident. Velsari watched the coordinate. The Ardent's drive signature. The array structure. The math was simple, the way math is simple when you already know what it's going to say and you are hoping you misread it. The drive signature vanished from the display in a brief, bright flare. The array went dark. 30 seconds. Velsari watched 6 positions on the display activate simultaneously, human ships emerging from the dark, coordinated in a way that should not have been possible without the signal blackout that one pilot had just bought them with everything they had. Velsari filed it. Anomalous behavior, self-termination for tactical unit advantage. The entry sat in their log. They stared at the coordinate where the Ardent had been. The coordinate did not change. Of course it did not change. That was not how coordinates worked. Velsari kept looking at it. "This changes nothing," HFY Harral said. Their tone was unchanged. The satisfaction luminescence in their integument was dimmer, perhaps, but the tone was unchanged. "The disparity in force remains absolute. This is extended resistance. The outcome is the same. Reeves had finished her transmission. She was looking at the tactical display from across the room. She had heard Sek Haral. "Give it an hour," she said. The Keth Dominion had absorbed 43 civilizations. Velsari had the records. Not one of them had sent a message like this. The battle was 40 minutes into its second phase, human ships still scattered, still hitting and vanishing, the Keth fleet having adjusted to a containment posture that acknowledged, implicitly, that running down dispersed human vessels in an asteroid field was a different problem than it had expected. When Reeves walked back to the communications array and opened a broadcast channel. Not encrypted. Not targeted. Open. "This is Lieutenant Commander Amara Reeves, Earth Defense Liaison, transmitting in the clear on all standard frequencies." She had the notepad. She had the pen, uncapped this time, held loosely in her left hand though she wasn't writing. "What I'm about to read is a matter of public record in Galactic Council archives. I'm reading it because it should be said out loud." Sek Haral turned. For the first time since Velsari had met them, their luminescence did something irregular, a brief, arrhythmic flicker that did not correspond to any of the Keth emotional states in Velsari's documentation. "The Velfani of the outer reaches," Reeves said. "Absorbed in the 104th cycle of the Keth expansion. Population at absorption, estimated 900 million. On the observation deck, the three other alien observers, a Grethana cultural attaché, a Mervosi trade representative, and a Selendi who had not given Velsari their name or designation, had stopped what they were doing. They were listening. The Grethana's secondary eyes had opened, which only happened under significant emotional load. The battle continued on the tactical display. Reeves read. "The Theresi Conclave. Absorbed in the 151st cycle. They had 17 words for the color of shallow water at dawn. None of those words exist in any living language." The pen moved in her left hand. Small movements, unconscious, tracing something against her palm. Not writing. Just moving. "The Korvathi Communion. The Seln Free Settlements. The Breathen Hegemony." Each name read with the same unhurried weight. Not recitation. Something else. Something Velsari did not have a category for in their documentation but recognized in their electromagnetic sensing as an enormous, steady field pressure not from the broadcast, not from the room, but from Reeves herself. Her field, flat since she had arrived, was no longer flat. It was enormous. Velsari stood very still. "The Oresh Wayfarers," Reeves said. "The Pale Compact. The Miravani." A pause, not for effect, just the natural pause of a breath. "The Cethali." The Mervosi trade representative made a sound that Velsari's sensory records would later classify as involuntary vocalization under emotional duress. The Cethali and the Mervosi shared a common ancestry. The record showed this. Velsari had known this. It had been a data point. Reeves kept reading. "The Galactic Council Observer Channel, standard procedural frequency, which Velsari monitored passively as part of their documentation duties, had been running its standard murmur of administrative notation. It went quiet. Something was listening. The Dravani Protectorate," Reeves said. "The chorus of the hegemonic fringe. The Velmir colonial settlements." Velsari's light script went dark. Not dim. Dark. The way a room goes dark, not gradually, but between one moment and the next. The Velmir colonial settlements. Absorbed in the 63rd cycle. Velsari's brood parent had been born on Velmir 4. Velsari knew this the way they knew their own sensory range and the weight of their own limbs, a foundational fact, always present, rarely examined. Their brood parent had been born there and had left before the absorption because the Threnodai diplomatic corps had posting requirements, and had never spoken of it after, not once in 30 cycles of Velsari's memory, and Velsari had learned early that the silence around Velmir 4 was a shape that should not be pressed. Reeves had said the name. Just the name. 3 words in standard Galactic. She had not said anything else about it. She had moved on. Another name, another civilization, the list continued, and the name of Velmir 4 was simply present in the room now, had been said out loud in front of witnesses for the first time in 60 cycles, as if it had always deserved to be said. Velsari looked at their hands. Six-limbed, the upper four pulled close to their torso, the lower two braced against the deck. Their light script was dark. They looked at their own dermis and there was nothing written there, no professional neutrality, no recording notation, nothing. Just skin. Just the absence of color, which in a Threnodai is not a neutral state. It is the state that happens when cognition encounters something it cannot process and simply stops trying and waits. Velsari looked at their hands for a long time. Reeves read the last name. 43 civilizations. She closed the notepad. She recapped the pen and put it in her pocket. She did not editorialize. She did not follow the list with an argument or a demand or a call to action. She had read the names. That was the message. The Galactic Council channel silent now, the administrative murmur replaced by something Velsari's instruments classified as open channel, no traffic, multiple active listeners, waited. The Keth Dominion sent a new fleet. Velsari had not thought it possible to feel dread on behalf of another species. They were revising that assessment. 800 vessels. The notification came through the council channel at the 53rd minute. Velsari noted the time with the meticulous precision of someone who was doing something precise because the alternative is standing still with their light script darkened, their cognition refusing to restart. 800 vessels emerging from the transit point near the outer system's heliopause. Not replacement forces. Reinforcement. The Keth had looked at what 312 human ships were doing to their fleet and had sent more ships rather than reconsidering the premise. Velsari did the calculation. They did not want to do the calculation, but they were a trained observer and the data was present and their cognition, once presented with numbers, did not have a reliable mechanism for not computing them. The result was not good. The result was the sort of number that, in Velsari's professional experience, preceded a civilization's entry into the historical archive rather than the ongoing diplomatic record. On the council channel, 3 observer delegates were requesting emergency session. The procedural language was careful, formal, constructed in the particular way that diplomatic language is constructed when the people using it are trying to say something that the rules don't quite have words for. The situation may require council review of the non-interference standard as it applies to ongoing military operations against a council-adjacent species. Non-interference was foundational. Non-interference was 400 cycles old. Non-interference had been the answer to every previous motion of this type, 7 of them, in Velsari's records, all failed, the Council declining to act on behalf of species that were being absorbed or destroyed by forces the Council could not police without becoming a force that policed the galaxy, which raised different problems. Reeves received the notification about the Second Fleet at the same time. She was quiet. Velsari watched her. 4 seconds. They counted, later, from the timestamp on their audio log. For seconds of silence, which in the human biosignature manifested as a brief, deep compression of the electromagnetic field, the first time since she'd arrived that her field had done anything other than sit flat and enormous. 4 seconds. Then, the field expanded again, and she took out her notepad, and she did not write in it this time. She held it and looked at it for a moment that Velsari could not parse, and put it back. She left the room. Velsari followed her. This was not in Velsari's operational protocols. Velsari's protocols were explicit. Observer diplomats maintained station on the primary observation deck for the duration of documented proceedings. They did not follow human liaison officers into the station corridor because they could not explain why they needed to be wherever that officer was going. Velsari's feet were moving. The protocol and the feet were in disagreement. The feet were winning. Reeves walked with the same unhurried quality she'd had since she arrived, and Velsari walked behind her and observed, which was at least technically within their professional mandate. She went to the Grethana cultural attaché's quarters first. Velsari had never been inside those quarters. They were not, to their knowledge, notable. The Grethana had been neutral in every council proceeding in living memory, a species of extraordinary cultural sophistication and extraordinary political caution, which they had turned into a kind of art form. The cultural attaché's name was Breath of Air and they had 4 secondary eyes and, Velsari now knew, a tendency to open all of them when listening to a human read a list. Reeves knocked. The door opened. Reeves talked. Velsari could not hear the conversation. They stood in the corridor and looked at the door and at the floor of the corridor and at the light diffusion panels in the ceiling and at the joint seam between 2 sections of wall paneling that ran at a slight angle suggesting a repair made under pressure, and they were very aware that their light script was doing something it had never done in a public corridor before, which was writing the Threnody word for "I don't know what I am doing here" in very small letters on the inside of their left forearm. Reeves came out. Went to the next door. Velsari followed. The Mervosi trade representative. The Selendi. One of the Threnody administrative staff, not Velsari's department, a logistics coordinator, someone who should not have had any vote in anything, but Reeves knocked and talked and the logistics coordinator looked at the floor and then looked at Reeves and said something short in Threnody that Velsari's translation matrix rendered as "I heard the names" and that did not capture the weight of it because there was no standard galactic equivalent for the particular Threnody inflection. That accompanies the naming of something that has been unspoken for a very long time. The council session was already convening. Reeves looked at the session notification on her handheld. She looked at Velsari. She did this with the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who was not performing anything, not asking, exactly, but acknowledging that Velsari was there, had been there for the last 40 minutes of corridor following, and that whatever decision Velsari made next was theirs to make. She didn't say anything. She went to the council chamber. Velsari stood in the corridor for a moment. The light diffusion panels hummed. The joint seam in the wall was still at a slight angle. Velsari looked at it, and, somewhere in the sensory background, they could feel the electromagnetic signature of the Keth fleet, both of them now, the original and the reinforcement, a combined pressure that was simply enormous, the kind of field weight that preceded outcomes Velsari had documented before. Their brute parent had been born on Velmir 4. Someone had said the name. Velsari went to the council chamber. The chamber had 32 seats and 14 were occupied and the session was already 3 minutes into procedural opening when Velsari entered and found a position along the observer rail and then, in a movement that their professional training would later need to file under a category that did not yet exist, stepped off the observer rail and moved to the address floor. The chamber went quiet in the specific way chambers go quiet when something outside the recognized procedure is happening. Every set of eyes, compound, singular, photoreceptive, electromagnetic, turned to Velsari. Velsari looked at the floor. The floor was a traditional Galactic Council light inlay pattern, 400 cycles old, the Council's founding iconography pressed into polished composite in geometric forms that were meant to represent the unity of diverse species under a common framework. Velsari counted the tiles in the nearest section. 12. The next section, 12 again. The pattern repeated, and, Velsari knew it repeated, had known it repeated for 31 cycles of observing proceedings from the rail, but they counted the tiles now because counting was something that cognition could do when the other things cognition was being asked to do were too large to begin. "My name is Velsari," they said, to the tiles. Then, to the chamber. "I am a Threnody observer diplomat. I am not a voting delegate. I am not a council member. I have no standing to address this body under the current procedural framework." One of the presiding council members began to speak. Velsari continued. "My brute parent was born on Velmir 4. 12 tiles. 12 again. I have known this my entire life. I have not said it in a council chamber because there was no procedural context in which it was relevant." The presiding member had stopped speaking. Today a human read the name of that colony aloud. As part of a list. As one name among 43. Velsari looked up from the floor. The chamber was very quiet. She had no tactical reason to do this. She was in the middle of a battle she was losing. She read the names anyway. All of them. In front of everyone who was listening. Reeves was standing to the side, back from the main floor, near the chamber entrance. Velsari did not look at her. Looking at her was not something they could do right now, in the same way that looking at Velmir 4 on a star map had not been something they could do since approximately the age of 7 cycles, because some things are too precisely the shape of something that was taken, and looking directly at them is harder than everything else combined. The motion before this body asks whether the non-interference standard applies in this case. Velsari's light script was writing something. They could feel it moving across their dermis, not a controlled expression, not professional notation, just their own biology writing what it needed to write. I am asking you to consider that the standard was written for a galaxy in which the options were interference and non-interference. I am asking you to consider that what I witnessed today was a third option. Something we did not model. A breath. She read the names because they deserve to be said. That is not a tactical position. That is not a diplomatic position. I have no framework for it in 31 cycles of training. The tiles. 12. 12. I am telling you that it worked anyway. The vote passed by 1. Velsari did not look at their own hands to see what their light script had written. They already knew. The declaration was formal, precise, 400 cycles of council procedural language deployed in service of something that had never been done before, a unanimous invocation of the Charter of Continuance's mutual defense clauses, dormant since the Charter's founding, activated now by a margin of 1 vote, and a Threnodai observer diplomat who had stepped off the observer rail and looked at the floor and said a name. 17 species, collectively and formally, told the Keth Dominion, not this one. The Keth fleet's response took 11 minutes. Velsari watched the tactical display during those 11 minutes with the focused attention of someone who is not certain what the next variable is going to be and has committed to observing it exactly as it is rather than as they hope it will be. The Keth Dominion was rational. That was the thing about them that made them comprehensible and terrible at once. They were completely rational, which meant they absorbed what could be absorbed efficiently and did not continue operations that were no longer efficient. They had always been able to absorb species individually because no species had ever cost them more than the gain was worth. 17 species collectively were a different calculation. The fleet stood down. Not a retreat, a cessation of active operations, pending formal Keth Dominion review of the Council Declaration's legal standing, which would take time and produce negotiations that Velsari would probably spend the next decade documenting. But the fleet stopped. The second fleet, still at the outer system margin, began a slow withdrawal to transit range. On the tactical display, the human ships still scattered across the asteroid field and the moon shadows and the debris did not consolidate immediately. They stayed where they were, still silent, watching. Velsari watched Reeves receive the notification. She was at the secondary viewport, the smaller one on the chamber's east wall, the one that did not have the full panoramic sweep of the primary but caught the gas giant's amber curve at a particular angle. She was holding a cup. One of the human staff, a young man, barely out of adolescence by human physiological standards, who had appeared at some point in the proceedings in the capacity of logistics support, had produced it from somewhere. The contents were dark brown and produced a smell that Velsari's sensory system categorized as organic compound, probable stimulant, strongly aromatic, not hazardous to Threnodai biology, extremely hazardous to Velsari's ongoing project of remaining professionally composed. Coffee. The human word appeared in Velsari's translation matrix with a note indicating that the substance was prepared from a roasted seed paste of terrestrial origin and consumed in quantities across the human population that the Threnodai Dietary Sciences database classified as technically voluntary intoxication. Reeves read the notification. She drank from the cup. She looked at the gas giant. "Good," she said. That was all. The young man appeared to be waiting for more and, when none came, nodded and left. Esike Haral had been absent from the chamber since the vote. Velsari had noted their departure. The particular way the Keth delegates' luminescence had changed before they left, which was not an expression Velsari had documented in Keth physiology before and which they were going to need a new notation category to file. The other observers were speaking in low voices, the post-preceding murmur of diplomats who had just witnessed something that had not been in the morning's agenda. Velsari walked to the viewport. They stood next to Reeves. She moved slightly, making room, an accommodation of proximity done without looking up, the kind of movement that happens when you have become accustomed to something being near you. Velsari was not sure when that had happened. The chrono said it had been approximately 9 hours since Reeves had come through the docking corridor with a flat electromagnetic field and asked where the bathroom was. 9 hours. Velsari looked at the gas giant. Did you know, they asked. When you read the names. Did you know the council would vote that way? Reeves considered this. Velsari had learned, in 9 hours, that her considers were worth waiting for, not because she was slow but because she was doing something real with the question before she answered it, and the answer she came back with was the answer and not a preliminary position. No, she said. She drank from the cup. The gas giant turned in the viewport, amber and violet, indifferent and immense. But I knew they were listening. Velsari's light script moved. They felt it, not the controlled professional notation they had trained for 31 cycles to manage, not the involuntary darkening they'd been unable to stop all day, but something in between. Something that moved the way something moves when it is writing what it actually is rather than what it has decided to present. They did not know what word it was writing. They had Threnody for professional composure and Threnody for rational grief and Threnody for the specific sorrow of Velmir IV and the absence of its name in living speech. They did not know if they had Threnody for this, for whatever 9 hours in a room with a human being does to a Threnody diplomat who thought they had already catalogued most of what the galaxy had to offer. They looked at the cup. It was a small thing. Worn, like the pen. Like the shuttle. Like the EVA suit that Reeves no longer needed but was still wearing. Everything she had was used, repaired, present objects that had been in situations and come through them and were still here, marked by the situations, still working. Velsari's light script was doing something it had never done before. They did not have a word for it. They would need to find one. The report Velsari transmitted to the Threnody High Council that evening was the longest document they had filed in 31 cycles of diplomatic service. It contained tactical analysis, procedural documentation, a complete record of the council session, and a formal recommendation regarding the renewal of the Keth Dominion negotiations. It began with one sentence. A sentence that was in no diplomatic template. A sentence that had never opened a Threnody Council report in 400 cycles of the institution's recorded history. A sentence that Velsari wrote last, after everything else was complete, and, then, moved to the top because it was the truest thing in the document. I have something to tell you about humans. Sonnet 4.6.